Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. Digital advertising is booming. Stats out of the US show that in 2021, the digital advertising spend worldwide was 520 billion US dollars. That's about 800 billion Aussie. And that this will grow to almost 900 billion US dollars in the next 5 years. My guest today has played a large part in that growth. Brian O'Kelly is widely considered the godfather of ad tech as one of the inventors of programmatic advertising, which we'll explain in a moment, or at least Brian will. He was the co-founder and CEO of AppNexus through to its $1.6 billion sale to AT&T, the telco giant in the US. He's done plenty of other things, including co-founding Waybridge, a supply chain technology company, but he's now returning to the ad tech space with a new venture. Scope 3 is a company with a strong environmental focus and a goal of fixing some of the problems of the system he helped develop. Brian's in Australia at the moment for the local launch of Scope 3 and joins me this morning. Brian O'Kelly, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thanks for having me.
What's it like being the godfather of ad tech?
I tell you what, when I go to a cocktail party and tell people that I'm an ad tech, they either walk away or say, "You're the reason I keep seeing these lingerie ads."
Yes.
And I try to explain it's because they visited lingerie sites.
A lot of people put themselves in it, really. Tell me, for those who aren't familiar, just explain what programmatic advertising is and how it differs from normal advertising.
Well, the idea of programmatic is that whenever you go to a web page or a mobile app or really anything, there's this split second between when the content loads and when the ads load. And in that split second, we hold an auction. And we go to every advertiser and every agency and all the buyers and say, who will pay the most money for this person right now? And so everybody's bidding on the chance to show you an ad.
Okay, so the point there, in a sense, is that if in the old world, let's say it's Toyota or a McDonald's, a big spender like that, might come and say, I want these slots on websites, on socials, whereas what you're talking about is that literally in a split second, someone is bidding for that spot and the highest bidder wins and gets it. So it's not kind of, if I'm McDonald's, I may not know exactly when my ad will run, but I know I'm bidding for a slot.
Well, I think the bigger difference is in the old world, everybody would see the same ad. If you were watching, Channel 9 at 5 p.m., McDonald's ad would show for everybody. Now, everybody sees a different ad because each advertiser sees every individual differently. And that means that there's a much more personalized experience. That's why I might get lingerie ads and you won't, because an advertiser might know that I've been browsing lingerie sites. That's powerful, but it also creates all of these problems around privacy, around all this technology being used to make these decisions. That's where Scope 3 comes in, because we're like, wow, that's a lot of computers and servers and electricity just to show people ads. Is it really worth it?
Just before we get on to Scope 3, so does it work?
Does it work in the sense of, does it make a lot of people more money? Yes. Does it work in the sense of, does showing everyone a different ad make the ads work better? Not clear.
Explain that.
Well, there's a lot of research that says that we need to, we're social creatures, basically. And that, one reason we buy things is because we think that all of our friends want the same thing. And so we're not just point and click machines. That just because you were searching for a car and you went to the car's website to check it out doesn't necessarily mean that you just want to see ads for that car.
Yeah.
And that the idea of branding in general is to create this sense of aspiration around what we might want or might need, or education. And that, the more we try to make it mechanical, like we're just mechanical Turks that are supposed to click on things, we kind of lose a little bit of the beauty and creativity of advertising. And so I guess I would say that what we've done is tried to optimize people, kind of the way that maybe you criticize a Facebook for trying to, turn us into algorithms, as opposed to letting synchronicity happen, that sense of discovery or joy of an ad that surprises us.
Yeah.
I think we need surprises. I think we're people, a species that wants to be delighted by things. I don't think you can optimize for that.
Stay with me, Brian. We'll be back in a minute. I'm speaking to Brian O'Kelly, founder and CEO of Scope 3. Okay, so let's move on to Scope 3 and what you're doing there. I mean, firstly, how's digital advertising harming the planet? Explain the link.
So out there in the cloud somewhere, there are millions and millions of servers, just computers sitting in these very cold, dark rooms. And these computers use a huge amount of electricity, something like 2% of all the electricity on the planet. There's been a lot of talk about crypto and how Bitcoin mining uses an immense amount of electricity. Well, programmatic advertising isn't that different. It's a highly computationally intensive way to try to figure out what ad you're likely to react to. And therefore, the more we do it, the more data we store, the more auctions we have, the more servers we need. And there's actually entire parts of the world where you can't even build a house, like in West London, because the data centers are using all the electricity.
Wow.
And that's crazy, right?
Yeah.
So it's a direct link between advertising and the internet and the real world. I think people assume that because it's digital or virtual, it's not physical. But every single thing you do online is tied to something physical. Some server in some data center using real electricity, using real water. That's the link.
Okay, so Scope 3 is your new company and it's focusing on emissions across the entire supply chain in the advertising, marketing and publishing industries. That's correct?
Yeah, exactly. That supply chain, the connection between the way that we fund the internet. The internet's basically funded by advertising and the impact of that advertising on the planet.
Okay, so how does it work? Can you give me almost a practical example just to explain how Scope 3 does the whole supply chain rather than just the end bit?
Yeah. So let's use a web page because I think we're all familiar with them. So if you go to a website, you're going to see, some text and some images. Behind the scenes, there's hundreds, sometimes thousands of different requests going to different servers all around the internet to pull back the images, to hold these auctions for ads, to share your user data with different people. Every time one of those requests goes out, it's going to a server. And it's causing one server to spin up for a few milliseconds to try to do something for you. So there could be thousands of servers involved in delivering one web page to you. And every one of those servers uses energy, as well as all the bandwidth being used to deliver all that to your computer or your phone, and then the actual CPU on your device that's actually spinning up and the screen and everything else. It's kind of amazing to think about all the elements of that supply chain coming together just to show you one little bit of content.
Yeah. And can you measure that?
We can. It's kind of crazy to think about it, but because I was one of the architects of programmatic advertising, I know how all of this works.
Yeah.
And I've been able to work with some of the largest brands and agencies in the world to help drive this impetus for reduction of carbon. Most big brands, most big companies have some kind of sustainability initiative. And when I explain to them, as an example, I went to a large consumer products company and we did some analysis that the programmatic advertising that they did just in Europe produced more carbon than all of their global business travel for the whole.
Wow.
They're like, wow, it would be a lot easier to address the carbon footprint of our advertising than to not fly to all these important meetings and conferences and whatever. Not that they shouldn't do that too, but it really is a huge number when you add it all up. And we can calculate pretty accurately. One thing that's interesting for Australia is that because your grid, your electrical grid, has a lot of coal in it, your average emissions per kilowatt hour are higher than in other places, which means that reducing your energy usage actually has a much bigger impact than in places that are more hydro or other renewable powered.
So are you helping these companies identify their emissions? Are you then doing the next step, which is helping them reduce them?
Absolutely. And that's the only reason that I'm doing this company is I want to actually reduce emissions from advertising and media. And so what we hope, the theory is that if these big brands see these numbers and they say, wait, I don't want to spend this much carbon on advertising, that they'll call their ad agencies, they'll call their ad technology partners, they'll call their key publishers and say, hey, I need you to reduce the amount of carbon you're emitting based on my spend. And there's very clear ways to do that I won't go into because there's some technology bits and pieces that are complicated, but basically holding fewer auctions, using less data, causing fewer servers to spin up every time you load a web page or an app is very possible. As an end user, as someone browsing the web, you would not notice these things. Maybe things would actually be faster, but it's a dramatic difference in the underlying carbon footprint. And if you're spending $1 billion a year on advertising, like think about Procter & Gamble spends $8 billion on advertising. I think when they call you up and say, hey, I need you to cut your carbon footprint, or I'm taking my money somewhere else, you're probably going to listen.
You're going to, yeah. I mean, just talking to you now and you kind of have this passion to reduce emissions. If you had your time again, would you have developed programmatic advertising or would you have done things differently?
Oh, that is a great question. The first version of programmatic was at a company called Right Media that I was the chief technology officer for back in 2004. And we sold that to Yahoo in 2007. And with that sale went a huge amount of intellectual property, most of which was around how to make programmatic more efficient. And unfortunately, that technology didn't go anywhere with Yahoo. And so I think if I'd known that it was going to get even crazier and more complicated and more fragmented, I might have found a better way to do it in the beginning. And sometimes I regret that we sold Right Media because I think we would have done many of the things we're doing now back then if we had still controlled the platform and the core technology.
Brian, good luck with Scope 3 here in Australia, and thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Thanks for having me.
That was Brian O'Kelly, founder and CEO of Scope 3. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.